So here I've got my profile portrait begun. It has the silhouette for the outline, the basic steps on the facial features. I did forget to draw the neck in a little bit here. And the neck is another thing to be careful of because people tend to make their neck much, much thinner and smaller than it actually is. But if you look at someone dead on, their neck is usually not much thinner than their face. And when you look at them in the profile, the neck really starts at the bottom of the chin, and then depending on the shape and angle of the neck determines how much of it you see, but it's not super far away from the chin. So like I said, the next thing I'm going to be doing is looking at my facial features here, my nose, my eye, and my lip, and making sure that those lines are correct before I go in with any shading. So on the shape of her nostril, I noticed that I had it a little bit wrong. It kind of goes almost flat across here and then down. And then her lips come a little more to a point here. Over and then down a bit. And then that lower lip comes out. Not quite as far as the upper lip. And it does go up towards the corner there. And then the corner, again, is about here. And then her chin comes down under that lip. Goes back. Not quite as far as I got it. A little more like that. So now I'm going to work on her eye a little bit more. And the eye is a little bit tricky because we are going to see part of the iris, but we are also going to see part of the pupil and more of the white than what we are used to seeing. And I'm not going to get complete detail in here yet. And then that lid sort of crease goes behind or above the eyelashes. The highest point is directly above the edge of the iris. And then it goes a little bit beyond that original line. And then the eyelashes come from here. And in profile view, they sort of almost just form a line. Kind of like that. So then at this point, my next step is going to be to erase my grid lines because I've gotten my portrait profile pretty much drawn. So the next thing to do is erase the grid lines and then use observation to make sure that I've got things as accurate as I can. I will correct that eyebrow line a bit first while I still have the grid lines, because the brow goes a little bit in front of the eye, goes up, it's almost parallel, but it does go straighter on the bottom, and then comes down here a little bit. And again, the eyebrow is going to vary a lot from person to person. So when you are drawing an actual person's profile, you want to make sure you pay attention to the angle, the shape, the size, and the placement of their particular eyebrow. So now I'm just erasing those grid lines. Now, when I am drawing a profile from observation, when I'm looking at a person, drawing someone, I start the same way. I start with sort of an egg and a circle shape for the head, and then I will do these same grid lines. And by the egg and the circle, I basically just mean that the front of their face is kind of like an egg, and I angle that egg depending on whether their forehead or chin is in front, and then the back of their head starts as a circle. It kind of just overlaps with that. And then the neck would come down here and here, and then all of the grid lines would go along here the same way that I've done there. And again, that would vary a lot per person, so you would definitely want to make sure that you are looking very closely at the subject that you are drawing. That's what this unit is all about, is practicing observational drawing, which basically just means that you are practicing looking at something and figuring out how to draw it as realistically and convincingly as possible, so that people know exactly what you were looking at and can actually recognize it. So again, just erasing that grid line. Not going to worry too much about the back of the head right now. There is an ear there. If you would like to try that ear, you may. I am not going to require it, because I am way more concerned with the face and making sure that you can get those proportions in there as accurately as possible. And one more thing to be careful of, people often tend to make the front of the eyelashes and the front of the eyeball along the same line, but they're not. The eyeball actually is below or behind the lashes and the eyelid. So it has kind of its own line. They're not all parallel. If you make them parallel, it's going to make it look like the eyeball is sort of bulging out of its socket, and it will lose some realism there. So then I'm going to go ahead and just start into some of the minimal shading. There's not a lot of shading here because, once again, the entire profile is focused primarily on getting the shapes and the placements as accurate as possible. But I do want you guys to do the little bit of shading that is there, because it will help you continue looking for the value ranges that you see and practicing with your value scales and gradations and different things like that. I'm going to actually use my kneaded eraser to clean this up a smidge in here and to lighten that line. Still doing vertical shading, especially on that upper lip. It's just good practice, good habits. On the lower lip, it's not quite as essential with the lip being in this particular view, but it can still be helpful. So that's about all the shading that is on this particular lip. Now, when you are drawing an actual person, once again, you'll want to pay more attention to their lip and where the values are there. So there's just a little bit of shading on the nose here. Just like we did with our other profile nose, it is primarily beginning and simply on the outer edge of the nostril where it connects to the skin below it. So the darkest part is still going to be sort of directly under the nostril, depending on where the lighting is, of course. And then our hole up here is going to obviously be the darkest. Once again, focusing on value scales and transitions, not just a dark spot. The same thing on the inside of the nostril here. And then it does get a little bit lighter as it goes down. And then the tip of the nose has a little shadow here. The highlight is up here. I'm going to leave that reflected light showing there. So again, remember, this is not full shading. The main purpose of this type of shading is just to indicate sort of where the shading would be with this particular example. We're less concerned with shading the profile than drawing it accurately and then indicating where the shading goes. Now that being said, I still will use a 6B just so that I can increase my contrast there. And I will use a tortillon on this one because the shading is so much lighter. It will help me make sure that my values stay nice and smooth. So now I'm just shading on the eye a little bit. The darkest spot is usually sort of right under the eye or right above it, sort of along the rim. And obviously, when you are drawing someone's eye, you want to pay attention to whether or not they're wearing mascara, makeup, that kind of thing, because it will actually affect the way that they look. I'm going to do a little shading here just to show where the eyelid is under everything else here. And then that upper lid is going to have more of the value because there is sort of that fold here. And remember, on the fold of the eyelid, you don't want the crease to be just a dark line. You want it to be a transition so that it gets lighter as it moves down, but also gets lighter as it moves up a little bit. So it might be a very quick transition, but it's not just a line. And then we can see just a little bit of this edge where that eyelid goes up into the eyebrow. Then I am going to darken those eyelashes just a little bit. And then I will work in the pupil and the iris a little more shading on the forehead. And then I will be using my 6B just to darken very selectively in certain areas to increase depth.